Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. Can you tell that I love living in independence? Because I can't stop talking about it. Uh, Not too long after we moved here, I got in contact with the stake historian, Sister Patrick, and she gave me a copy of this document that was published in 1996 to commemorate the 25-year anniversary of the creation of the Independence, Missouri stake. And it's taken me a while to get to this because I'm just doing so much stuff and I have to prioritize, but I finally got some time to look through this and I found something amazing. There's actually a number of things I want to share with you, but let me share the primary focus of this video right now. This is called A Brief History of the Independence, Missouri Stake of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I don't know who wrote it. It was probably the stake historian at the time, or maybe multiple people worked on it. I don't know. But I was looking at this page right here, and I let me just read it. Okay. Since the earliest days of the Restoration, church leaders have placed much emphasis on the use of the printed word to assist in the spreading of the gospel. The Zion Printing and Publishing Company, which was established in Independence in 1907, had helped further missionary work for more than 4 decades by publishing the missionary periodical, quote-unquote, Liahona, as well as other church publications. And so, we recognize this name. We recognize it from the Book of Mormon, of course, but we recognize it as a modern-day publication, don't we? And so I wondered, okay, wait, it can't be. The Liahona, that is now the official church magazine, did it start in Independence, Missouri? Because you'll remember that during President Nelson's presidency, the church did away. The church did away with the Ensign. It was retired. It was essentially the English magazine. I don't know if it was just for the United States or if it was all for all English speaking countries, but you had the Ensign, and then for other languages and other countries, you had the Liahona. And it was all consolidated into the Liahona. I thought that was interesting. I thought that there was something to it. And now I'm starting to think that there is even more to that because I did some research. And in that first issue, January 2021, in the Liahona, they printed this article by Marvin K. Gardner, Liahona Managing Editor. The Liahona, Past, Present, and Future. And it has a few different names here, times and seasons, Millennial Star. The first one you have Liahona. But let me read you a few of these parts here. In 1832, 2 years after the church was organized, the first Latter-day Saint periodical, okay, the first, the Evening and the Morning Star, was published in Independence, Missouri. Now, the Evening and the Morning Star, I guess in this sense, since it was the first periodical or newspaper / magazine, I guess you could say that this is the true beginnings of it, which started here in Independence. But I just want to point out, it's interesting because you have the Independence Visitor Center. When you take the tour, you go downstairs and they have a recreation of the W. Phelps Printshop that printed that periodical. If you walk just a short distance to the east, if you're walking, it probably just takes maybe 10 minutes. If you drive, it's just 1 or 2 minutes. But within a very short distance, you can go to the actual location. I actually made this video on my other channel called Explore Church Sites, where I walk from the Independence Visitor Center to the actual location. They have this marker, number 8. It's part of the Missouri Mormon Walking Trail. There's 14 plaques in the sidewalks of Independence. But number 8 marks the location of the printing office. It says, Church Printer W. W. Phelps published the first paper in Independence, the Evening and the Morning Star, in June 1832. On July 1833, the printing office was demolished. That's the famous story of the two girls, as well as another church member that saved as many printed pages of the manuscript for the Book of Commandments, and then they hid in the cornfield. This is that story. So if you think about it, like that was essentially like if it was, modern day, it's like an attack on wherever the Liahona is printed, which I suppose it's probably in, Utah somewhere. But could you imagine that if that location was attacked and burned down? Well, this is essentially the equivalent back then when the Saints were first in Jackson County. But let's go back to this. Okay. Subsequently, many additional English-speaking periodicals were published, such as the Latter-day Saints Messenger and Advocate, Times and Seasons, Millennial Star, and then it goes on. We've recently been reading from Juvenile Instructor. There's a lot of really good visions and visitations that have been published in that. And then it lists a bunch of other ones. In 1846, 1 year before the pioneers entered the Salt Lake Valley, the church's first periodical in a non-English language was published in Wales. Church magazines in non-English languages usually began in missions around the world, which that's good for me to know. I feel like I've touched on that fact in other videos, but it's good to actually hear that, yeah, that's like the Millennial Star. That was for the UK. Several titles included the words star, light, or torch. Others were known as the voice, path, or friend of the saints. By the year 2000, titles of all editions had been changed to Liahona. Okay, so this is interesting because we know that the church is becoming a more and more global church, and we're moving closer and closer to the second coming and the millennium, right? And we all know what's going to happen with Old Jerusalem and New Jerusalem in the millennium. These are going to be the two world capitals. The word of the Lord is going to come from Jerusalem, and the law is going to come from New Jerusalem. But essentially, you're going to have these two center places where you're going to have the teachings of the Lord, the law, just everything that's coming out of Salt Lake right now and more is going to be coming out of what's currently Independence, Missouri, and also Old Jerusalem. So think about it in that sense. It feels like, to me, and I don't know if this is intentional, but it feels like in a small way, at least as far as like the history of the Liahona goes, it feels like there's starting to be a little bit of a transition. I don't know if the Liahona will ever be printed here in Missouri. It's not currently, but it does have this history that's associated with it. All right, continuing. Where does the name Liahona come from? The word Liahona is a Book of Mormon term meaning compass or director. It serves well as the title of international publications because it is unique to the church and has identical meaning in all languages. Here's how the Liahona magazine developed, changing, quote unquote, from time to time, just as did the writing on the Liahona that directed Lehi's family. I like that insight because, again, we're talking about Independence, Missouri, and we're talking about essentially where this magazine started. And potentially its future. So in other words, it's almost like you had this shift in the year 2000 by changing all the titles of all these different editions of these church magazines to Liahona. And then in 2021, during President Nelson's presidency, and you have a 21 in there, 21 is 3 sevens, you have yet another shift where it's finalized. It's not just foreign-speaking countries. It's the entire church brought in under the Liahona. Okay, so 1907, of course it's 1907, the Liahona, an English language periodical of the Central States Mission, began publication in Independence, Missouri. This is the first bullet point. It soon merged content and title with an existing publication and became known as Liahona, the Elders' Journal. And there's a picture of that right here. Liahona, the Elders' Journal, entered as second-class matter at the post office at Independence, Missouri. And then it says Independence, Missouri again right here. And the date. This is amazing. I never knew this. And it makes me so excited. It then goes through a bullet point like timeline that's a little hard to follow at certain points, but it mentions the Mexican mission, Brazilian mission, and then one for Native Americans, and then later on 16 independent non-English magazines being unified. And then one of the big turning points was 1977, where the Philippines magazine called Tambuli, that became the Liahona. And this is kind of like where things really started to consolidate and where the Liahona really started to become what we know it as today. Okay, later on, 1993, it talks about Liahona and all these different languages and whatever. Here's 1999 and 2000. Titles of all remaining language editions were changed to Liahona. And then January 2021, Liahona becomes the title of the church's new magazine for adults and begins publication in 48 languages. The Friend and For the Strength of Youth also become available in the same 48 languages. In additional 39 languages receive selected articles in a digital format. And then that's the end of the timeline. And then the last paragraph in this article says, the changes to church magazines in January 2021 are truly historic. These exciting adjustments continue to fulfill the first presidency's direction that the magazines are to be a valuable resource for learning about the gospel and for feeling a sense of belonging to the church. So I feel like I already said, that this signaled a certain shift. I feel like this is moving us forward toward the day when at some point church headquarters will come to Jackson County. The temple, as well as all 24 temples, will be built, the city and all that stuff. And maybe we'll see the day when the Liahona is once again actually published from Independence or the New Jerusalem. But I had no idea. I didn't know that the Evening and the Morning Star was the first publication of the church, and that Liahona basically started in 1907 here in Independence. So I think that's significant. President Nelson has talked about the future of Jackson County. There's people that think that the plan has changed, and no. In his book called Daily Joy, he specifically says Jackson County. I wasn't thinking of talking about that, or else I would have pulled it up. But I've shown it a million times already. It's in his book called Daily Joy. And there's also another book too. So, okay. So I wanted to show that to you. And just one more visual. When we think about the word Ensign, at least for me, I strongly associate it with Utah because of Ensign Peak. This is Ensign Peak right here. This is a video that I took when I did my most recent Utah trip, and I hiked all the way up to the top of Ensign Peak. This is the peak that Brigham Young saw in vision while he was still in Nauvoo, and how he recognized that this was the place to establish church headquarters. And they literally flew a flag, an ensign, at the top of Ensign Peak, and they still have these flags at the bottom. You have the United States flag in the middle, the state flag of the state of Utah, and then you have this one with these blue and white stripes, and there's blue stars. It looks kind of like the American flag, but it's just all blue and white. It's the flag of the kingdom of God. It is the ensign. And so you've had this period of time, and it's still going on, where church headquarters is in Utah. And that's where all our missionary efforts and everything in the church is being directed from Utah. So if you have a shift in the magazine in 2021 from Ensign to Liahona, one that you would associate with Utah, the other, if you know its history, you would associate with Independence, Missouri, it may be a sign of things to come. That's all I'm saying. Okay. Yeah, this is a picture I recently took. This was later on in the night. I was hoping that the aurora would still be vibrant, but by this point it was kind of fading away, but you can still kind of see it. Make sure to subscribe to Explore Church Sites. It's my other channel. Okay, and then a few other things. I have this timeline that I'm putting together. This tab is called Timeline Missouri. Now that I live here, and because of the importance of Missouri in the future, well, both now and in the future because of prophecy, I've wanted to see, how has the return of Missouri looked like? When did it start? When did we have our first branch, our first ward? When was the independence stake created? And it's this spreadsheet that led the stake historian to send this to me, because I was asking for some of this information, and she's like, "Oh, I know where you can find that." And so she gave it to me, and I've added some new items on here. So I'll just read what I put on here instead of, I was going to read through like these different things, but this is the first chapel that was constructed and dedicated in Independence since the expulsion. Unfortunately, it no longer exists. I guess it went into disrepair. It got old. I don't know. But as you can see, it was a pretty amazing chapel. It would be great if at some point in the future, the church decided to reconstruct this. I hope that those plans are still around, because it's a really pretty building. But anyway, so we have, 1907. There's three things that happened. We already talked about the Liahona. It began publication in 1907 by the Zion Printing and Publishing Company. And then Independence became the headquarters of the Central States Mission, formerly known as the Southwestern States Mission, with Samuel O. Benyon as mission president. And just really quick, I recognize that name, Benyon, because Benyon is where I started my life. But that is where I started mortality. I was born in the Salt Lake Valley, and my first home was in the guest home of my great-grandparents. My parents were temporarily living on their homestead and in the guest home. And Taylorsville, Utah, which is right next to Murray. I grew up in Murray, but Taylorsville is right next to it. And there's this section of it, basically like a neighborhood or an area called Benyon. And I looked into the history, and I found this. This is a old website, as you can see, but it talks about how the name Benyon honors the William Benyon family, who were prominent early residents. And then here's Samuel O. Benyon. I wasn't able to connect him with the William Benyon family per se, but I'm thinking that he probably was part of that family, because he is also from Taylorsville. So that's just kind of special to me if there is that connection, because now I started my life out in Taylorsville, and now I live in Independence. So it's kind of cool. Okay, back to the spreadsheet. So, and then the first Relief Society in Independence was organized on August 20th. So you had those three things in 1907. And then 7 years later, President Joseph F. Smith dedicated the first chapel in Independence. It's that chapel that we were just looking at. So it's the first chapel since the expulsion in 1833. So that was significant. And then I learned, I had no idea about this. In August of 1946, Independence was being considered as a possible site for the United Nations. We're all familiar with the United Nations building, right? I should have pulled that up. United Nations building, New York. It's this kind of like monolithic looking building. I guess is this part of it? It must be. I'm only familiar with this part of the building, but anyway, could you imagine this instead of being in New York City, being in Independence, Missouri? Well, I guess that was a possibility and something that they were considering. Today, there is this UN Peace Plaza right across from the Temple lot. It commemorates the 50th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, and it also mentions the fact that on June 27th, 1945, President Harry S. Truman formally announced that the United States was a signatory to the UN Charter, and he announced that in the auditorium. Let me see if I can let's look at it from the front right here. And by the way, I do believe that this is part of Temple Land, the original Temple Land for the 24 Temple Complex. So we might have to wait until the millennium to get this. I don't know what it would take for the church to purchase this land. But it's in rough shape. You can see you have some letters missing over here, the AZA at the end of Plaza, and the fountain, like it was running earlier this year. Then it was like leaking, like it was spilling over the sides, and it's I don't know. It needs to be fixed up. But anyway, that's kind of interesting, right? Because right now, if there was a world capital, so to speak, you could look at it a few different ways. You might just say, well, Washington, D.C., because that's the capital of the most powerful nation in the world. Or you could say whatever, but you could potentially say, wherever UN headquarters is at, right? As of right now, before the millennium, aliens might consider that the capital, or where they would send their ambassadors. So it's interesting that you have this in Independence, and we all know the future of Independence. It is going to be one of the two world capitals, right? It's really interesting. Okay, so let's move on from that. October 21st, again, 21 is 3 sevens. The Kansas City Stake was organized by elders Harold B. Lee and Mark E. Peterson of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and the Independence branch became a ward. 1956. I don't know if the Kansas City Stake was the first stake. I kind of think it was. I'm kind of thinking, based on different things I've seen, I think that St. Louis is probably like the first stake, but I need to do more research. I thought I had, I forgot to, oh no, I already had this on here, but I just got a few more details. And then March 25th of 1971, that's when the Independence Stake was organized by President Spencer W. Kimball, at that time acting president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. And this is the new bit of information right here. The Independence Missouri Stake was the fourth in Missouri, and it was created from the division of the Kansas City Stake. And it was created 140, again, 14, or it's 14 is a multiple of 7. So 140 years from the time that Joseph Smith identified Independence as the site of the city of Zion. I've seen so many of these numbers with key events that have taken place in Missouri. I keep pointing them out whenever I can, but there's just a lot. So I'm getting a more and more clear picture of the history of this place. And interestingly, I'll just note this really quick. It seems to have really started for our church. It seems to have really started with the dedication of the Salt Lake Temple. Because after the Salt Lake Temple was dedicated, that's when all these different milestones. That's when we started to reach all these different milestones, such as the first branch organized in independence. It was just 4 years later after the dedication of the Salt Lake Temple. You had Wilford Woodruff and others, including the Tabernacle Choir, that came to Independence as they were going to the Chicago World Fair. It's this one right here, which I think that's interesting. Salt Lake Temple is dedicated, and then that same year, just a few months later, the president of the church comes to Independence, Missouri, visits the temple lot. The Tabernacle Choir does a performance. They're welcomed by the people and the mayor. And then just, within about 10 years, just a little bit over 10 years, that's when our part of the temple land was purchased, where the Independence Visitor Center currently is. That was in 1904. So, and then just shortly after that, that's when the Liahona started publication. It's so interesting. I feel like there's been a lot of things going on behind the scenes, and you wouldn't really know unless you're a historian or you just read every single book that you can about church history that mentions independence after the expulsion. It's just, how do you know unless you put something like this together? And I feel like there's more to discover. And when I find those things, I'll bring it to you. So I'm excited to see what the future holds. I think that we're going to see a lot of these things sooner than later, because I think that the second coming is going to happen sooner than later. And independence has a really big role to play in all that. But that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.